So yeah, basically going straight to it, what does the regulation require? In principle, the regulation requires, on the one hand, the introduction of a complete list of ingredients on the labeling of the wine, right? So what does it mean to, when we talk of ingredients, it's everything that's contained in the final product. The second part to it is we need to add the nutritional declaration, right? So this is basically a table with all the nutritional facts. It comes from the European Union. It's a given structure. We'll look into it after, but basically we need to include this. Now, all of this information needs to be available in the 24 languages of the European Union. So the European Union has 24 official languages. All the information needs to be accessible in those 24 languages. The idea behind the regulation is to add the same, or basically equalize the information that needs to be added to all food products, basically apply that to also wines. We're going to be speaking about wines throughout this presentation since it's the biggest category that is affected, but just for your information, it applies to every single alcoholic product that contains grape. So any sort of liquor, cognac, etc. would also fall under these requirements. Now, understanding that obviously this is extremely difficult to fit in into the labeling of a wine bottle, right? If we've got to add this 24 times, we're probably going to need a whole book attached to it. And so recognizing that, the European Union allows for this information to be included through a QR code. And we will see also throughout this presentation, what does it mean to then add the information through a QR code instead of just the 24 languages on the label, right? The only important thing there to take into account is all this information continues to be, you need to continue showing it within the same view as the rest of the labeling requirements. So basically in the back of the bottle, it needs to be present there. Now, one of the biggest questions is, when does this regulation come into effect, right? There were sort of a lot of different dates thrown around. The regulation got introduced in 2021. There was a 2-year phase-in period, and now every single product since the 8th of December 2023 needs to comply with the regulation. Now, this date means all the products produced after December 8th, 2023, and produced is a different meaning depending on the category, but since we're talking mainly about wine, in the case of wine, it means fermented, yeah? So this regulation technically applies to everything fermented after the 8th of December. Now, it's really important to note, however, that depending on the country that you're exporting through, a lot of different countries have decided that in the import side, they're just going to do a blanket application of this, and they're just going to go ahead and require this from every single product, regardless of when it was produced. The individual countries have the ability to do so, and also a lot of bigger wine sellers, so to speak. So when you're talking about like the supermarket chains, etc., they've decided, for example, in Germany, that they're also going to just apply this on a blanket basis for everything they sell after the 8th of December. So you would have to check with your import partner whether this will affect you also for the wines that are previous to the 8th of December, but the regulation says everything fermented past the 8th of December. We just have a little snippet down here showing the regulation. I'm not going to read it out loud, but it just comes to say that basically fermented is the moment that they consider the product produced. Now, why is it really important to comply with it? It's probably one of the strictest regulations we've seen come out for this segment in a long while. Now, what they basically say is they're going to impose a fine of 16,000 to 40,000 euros per basically element of the regulation that is not being complied with. So this both means that if we are, for example, we don't have the ingredients list, we don't have the nutritional declaration, or we're missing some languages, or we do some of the things that we're also going to see now next, which they say not to do, like include marketing information or some sort of traceability, they're going to charge us that. I've just converted it there to dollars, just so we all speak the same language, but it's a lot of money. And basically, I mean, the biggest risk is they can even ask you to withdraw the product from the market. So we've always kind of gone with the interpretation that, it's better safe than sorry. And what you're going to see throughout our platform when we show it a bit later is that we've really gone for, maximum compliance and sort of the strictest interpretation of the law, just to make sure that we're always on the clear. Now, going a bit into the details of what we have to do with the law, let's think about the ingredients list first. I'm going to say, just to preface everything, this regulation does not remove existing requirements from having to be on the physical label. What do I mean by this? So for example, allergens will now have to be included also in this ingredient list, but they still need to go highlighted on the actual physical label. It's just all the other ingredients, etc., don't have to be. They can be contained in the digital label, and all the different translations don't have to be. They can be in the digital label. So the ingredients list must include every single element contained in the final product, and it needs to highlight the allergens, once again, even though they're already on the physical label. Yeah. Now, the ingredients must be ordered by quantity that is present in the final product, right, from larger to smaller. It's pretty easy for wines because the EU also says that everything that represents less than 2% of the final product can just go at the end of the list and in any order. And this for wines ends up being grapes and everything else. But, just take that into account. And also there's different categories for each one of the ingredients that they've defined, and those categories need to be grouped. This is a pretty complex process, but if you follow, for example, what we will show you in the platform does all the grouping and everything else automatically, so that's not a big deal. And then also, of course, these ingredients need to be in the 24 languages of the European Union, and they need to follow the European Union mandated translations into all those 24 languages, which again wouldn't be an issue with the platform since we have that contained. Now, if we look at the nutritional declaration or the nutritional table, this is really important to take into account that it has to be precisely in the structure that the European Union mandates. So this is the structure right here. This is the table. It's a snippet straight out of their regulation. And basically, we get customers saying, hey, wines have no saturated fats. Why do we need to report on it? Makes no sense. True, but the European Union requires it. I see I still have a sentence there in Spanish, but it comes to simply say we need to follow the regulation to the dot, right? Now, the table also has a certain requirement for how the energy gets shown, first kilojoules, then kilocalories. It needs to follow all of this. It needs to follow the nomenclature, of course, again, of the European Union. And again, the same as with the ingredients list, it needs to be in the 24 languages of the European Union. Now, one big question we always get is regarding how to calculate the energy value. This does not require to go through a lab or whatever. It's enough to know the main drivers in energy within a wine, and then you can give the estimated energy value based on that, right? So here are, for example, the conversion factors that the European Union allows for the calculation of energy. In reality, with wines, and we'll see next that the actual error margins that the European Union allows are pretty generous. So in reality, using the carbohydrates, which comes to be the sugars, and using the alcohol is more than enough to end up with a good estimate of the energy value of the wine, since this is also the most important part of the nutritional declaration. But we'll see now that the error margins are pretty large. So I've set them here, but in reality, all you need to know is they're basically painting every food category with the same brush. So, what might be very tight error margins for, I don't know, a frozen pizza actually end up being extremely generous error margins for wine. Like in the case, for example, if we look here at sugars, everything that has less than 10 grams of sugar per 100 grams, has a plus minus 2 grams of sugar, which means that for most wines, since the reporting requirement is for 100 milliliters, plus minus 2 grams is a lot of error margin, right? The same with like energy, it's plus minus 20% of the final value. So we're always going to be in pretty, safe space as long as we make sure that we've got the information and that it's somewhat near to what the actual values would be. And with that said, the good thing also is the European Union allows for 3 different ways of filling in the nutritional declaration. One is, of course, you go to the lab, you get everything tested, and then you fill it in. The other one is also you simply have some of the values, but not all of them. So for example, we've got alcohol volume and we've got sugars, but we haven't calculated the energy. Well, then we can use, our platform has a calculator, or we can use the before mentioned conversion values to come to the energy value. And then the third option is to use what they call industry standard values, which basically comes to say, hey, if we produce a white wine of a certain variety, and it's fairly well known that most of these usually fall between this and that in terms of values, then we can also use those values. We also provide sort of the industry standard values within our own platform, so you can choose which one of the 3 methods best applies to you. Of course, the more precise, the better. But since we're not giving a lot of flexibility when it comes to this regulation, it's best to at least use all the flexibility we do have. Now, we've gone through the requirements of what we need to report. What is it? What does it imply? What does it entail to use a QR code instead of a leaflet with all 24 languages and all this information? Well, basically, we need to include 3 things when we use a QR code. It needs to be a title to the QR code, it needs to have the QR code, and it needs to still include the energy value on the physical label. So those are the kind of 3 new requirements to be added to the physical label in case we use a digital platform. Now, the size of the QR code does not come given by any law, right? But they do say it needs to be legible. And so because it needs to be legible also by old phones, etc., we usually recommend having a size of 1.5 times 1.5 centimeters, which comes to be, I believe, slightly over half an inch by half an inch. So you have to take into account that. Then the other thing is it needs to have a title. The reasoning for the title is the consumer needs to know what's on the QR code without scanning the QR code, because it can never lead to confusion between this QR code and any sort of marketing QR code that may be used. So, again, the wording is not legislated, but there's really not a lot to choose from. It's either ingredients and nutritional declaration, or nutritional table, or nutritional table and ingredients. Any mix of those words will work, but that's basically what you need to include. Now, there's also a bit here about the languages that need to be used for the titling. You obviously need to use your own language, so in this case, English. And if you're going to, send it to the whole European Union, at least one of the common languages, which are also English, German, French. Of course, if you only export to Poland or to Italy, or Italy and Poland, then it's best to also include those 2 languages. But in general, we have that flexibility to say the own language plus one of the common languages should be good. Now, very important, particularly for those that are exporting, there was a communication back in the day, about a year ago, from the European Wine Association, kind of saying, hey guys, forget about the titling requirements. It's more than enough to just add an eye of information in the center of the QR code. And this was very prominently kind of distributed because it saves space and all that. And it turned out that this was not true. The European Union came out with an addendum saying that this would not be allowed. And so it is absolutely not allowed to include an eye in the middle of the QR code instead of the title. Yeah, this is not allowed. You will still find some articles saying that, and particularly in markets that export to the European Union, this information maybe hasn't really gone through as well. But tons of labels have been burned because of this. And so if you take anything from this, make sure you take that detail with you. Now, because we add the QR code with the title and the energy value, does not mean that any other information needs to be removed from the current label. So all the existing labeling requirements stay the same. this is an add-on. Yeah, so not just because we're adding the allergens, for example, on the digital label, can we remove it from the physical label, or not just because we show the alcohol volume on the digital label, can we remove it from the physical label. Now, the third point we mentioned, right, we've got the title, we've got the QR, we also need to show the energy value. Now, very important here, you can do it two ways. You can add the 24 languages saying energy in all 24 languages, or you can use specifically this format, an E to represent energy, followed by 100 milliliters, then kilojoules, then kilocalories. We will see later the platform that we offer already gives you that format given that you can just copy paste, but this is really important because it saves you a ton of space. That's the third element that we need to add. And now the other thing, the European Union says that it has to follow the spirit of a physical label. And then it adds, it cannot contain any marketing information, this QR code. It must be hosted on a dedicated platform without any sort of traceability, any sort of analytics, any sort of cookies, and absolutely no marketing material. This is particularly sometimes surprising to our American partners, since privacy is a bit more lax over there. But for the European Union, it's one of the biggest things. They have all these laws. I'm sure you've seen all the lawsuits that happen around that. They tend to get a lot of publicity. Doesn't make a lot of sense. No. Would it be a great opportunity to include marketing information? Yes, but it is what they require, and so it is what it is. And this is important just because there were a couple of offers we've seen sometimes in outside markets that have not read through the regulation in detail and kind of did not follow on those points that are so important. Considering what is considered marketing material, we've got the snippet here of one of the regulations that legislates this, but just for reference, the whole regulation, if you were to compile it, it's over 1,000 pages that kind of boils down to these slides that we're showing here. So there's a lot more to this definition, but I think this was a very clear way of showing that it's really not allowed, right? And so basically, I'm not going to read it out loud, but it comes to say we cannot add any marketing image, so no images at all, no sort of element that could be understood as marketing. If they can interpret that it might be marketing, they can fine you. It doesn't matter that it doesn't say word for word that that specific element is not allowed, which is why, for example, you'll see in our platform, we do not allow for any sort of like free input of, what could the wine pair with well, or we don't add any sort of images, etc., because we just think it's not worth gambling on the type of sanctions one can get, right? So it's really important when it comes to European Union law that we don't just follow the wording, we also follow the spirit of what they're saying, and they can fine you based on the spirit, even if in the wording it's, if you can find a different interpretation to the wording. So absolutely no connection to the website, no connection to a web shop, no sort of outside links, no cookies, no analytics, etc. And to the question of traceability, which is the other one that's so important, right? Basically here, we need to take into account, again, we cannot save where the customers are accessing the information from. We cannot give you analytics on that. We are not able to capture those analytics either. Obviously, the regulation also comes with certain technology requirements that we ourselves need to also follow. And so, it is just really, really important that all of these points get followed, because complying is easy, but messing it up by being adventurous is equally easy, really. So with that, I think we got a good overview of what the regulation kind of asks for us, what it doesn't allow. These are the bigger buckets, I would say. We're going to dive a bit deeper now when we actually go through our platform, filling in all the information. So you kind of see in practice, what does it require? What information do you need to have on hand? And how do we think about the European Union requirements and then also the individual country requirements. This is the page we're going to see once we enter for the first time. Obviously, the first time you come, you're not going to see already a whole list of labels created. This is just our demonstration account, so many people have access to it. But to create a label, super easy. We go here up top to the right, create a label, right? The only thing required to create a label in itself is just the name of the product. I'm going to be very uncreative. I'm just going to call it Wine 54. The harvest year is not required to be shown on the digital label. Okay, if you sell wines that are not, dated with a harvest year, you do not have to include it on the label. The only thing that's important to note is the European Union does require for every single product to have its own separate QR code. So even if you're selling a, 2023 and a 2024, and they have very similar values or whatever, those need to be distinct QR codes. The only bit of flexibility they give us there is if we have different, I don't know the word right now, but basically if within 2023 of the same product, batches, right? If we produce different batches, but the ingredients are the same, the energy value is the same, the process has been the same, everything is the same, then those different batches may use the same QR code, but they have to be the same. No change in what we put into the product. And if we change from one year to the next, immediately new QR code. But we don't have to show it in the label if it's a product that we sell without one. Now we're just gonna add 2024 over there. And now we're presented with two options. One, we can create the label. This is what most of our customers do. With this, the label will appear here on the list. We can export the QR code. We can send it to the designer, put it on the label. And whenever we have time, the platform allows us to edit the information within a label at any given point. So we can always come back and finish the label later. If we already have all the information, the info from the lab or whoever we're waiting for, we can just click add more information. In this case, we're going to click on create the label, since that's the path that most of you will take. And we see, here we go, our beautiful wine 54 has appeared. We can select it. We can go for export QR codes, and the QR code will export in PNG format with the name of the wine as the name of the file. Yeah. So if we are, for example, sending 20 different labels to our printing partner, we can, they're not going to get confused because the names are basically right there. Now, let's say, we've sent off the label, it's been designed, it's already being printed, or maybe we're already even shipping it to Europe. We can go here to edit label, and any given time we can update the information. Yeah. Now, we've tried to make the platform as easy and intuitive as possible. What you need to do to comply is you start at the top, you finish at the bottom, and you're done. Yeah. And that's basically, been the whole philosophy here, to make it as simple as possible. Even somebody that doesn't know the regulation can simply complete the form and will be complying. The first part is a bit more quote unquote optional. This relates mostly to different European Union countries that might have different regulations. We don't want you to need 20 different tools to comply with European Union regulations. So everything that's kind of like the digital labeling of wines, we've got compiled into this. And the second part is that which applies blanket to every single member state, because it's the new regulation, right? So number one, the company, we cannot add a lot of information, but at least the brand name and the country of origin. This will be auto-filled from your registration, but if you need to change it, you can change it here. You're going to see throughout the platform that we have different advanced settings sections. This is because maybe there's a couple of requirements that affect a small minority of wineries and not the majority, and so that minority knows where to find, those fields they need to fill in, and the rest can just ignore it. In your case, it is important because you need to report the importer of the wine, and you can do that here in advanced settings in just the name of the importer and the address. Once you already have it you already have it in the system, you don't need to refill, let's say, the information every single time. You can just click use a previous importer, and then you'll be able to select from the list of importers you've already added before. If you're only selling the wine but somebody else produces it, you also need to give their name and address right there. The product and bottling section is really just a way of giving the label a bit more color. This is not required in the digital label, but it just makes it so that when the customer opens it, they don't just see, a plain nutritional table and a plain list of ingredients. They also see a bit more about the wine. And since our platform is also designed for accessibility and so on, it just makes it very easy for people that might want to read it in bigger letters or whatever to see that information also here. With that said, you do not need to fill it out. You don't need to fill out every field if you don't want to. And whatever field you don't add, the platform's going to recognize that you didn't want to add that information. So it'll act as if it never existed. The consumer isn't going to suddenly see a white blob because some information wasn't filled in. For the sake of showing you guys later what it actually looks like, I'm just going to add a few pieces of information, and that's it. Here in advanced settings again, what we're going to see is an internal product reference and a GTIN number. These are two fields the consumer does not see. This is only for your own use. If, for example, you don't internally manage your references by wine name, but you have some other internal system, or for example, you don't want to show the harvest year to the consumer, but you still need to keep record of what, harvest year is what QR code, you can do it here. It'll appear on the list that we saw in the beginning, but the consumer will not see it. And then finally, the pictogram section. This is really the section everybody kind of needs to know what the existing requirements are for the markets that they export to. We've got some basic pictograms here. For example, these first three are the ones that France requires. But if you have your own pictograms that you need to upload, you can just upload them once, and from then on, they will always appear as an option for those of you that require extra pictograms. You can always, whenever you generate a new label, they will appear as an option. You don't need to upload them again. Same thing with sustainability. You can select the first ones, or you can select whichever ones apply to you, or you can upload your own. But in this case, we did these three just to show you guys later. But again, this really depends from country to country. So Spain, for example, doesn't require any sustainability labeling. Germany, for example, has requirements around the use of organic logos or the green dot, etc. Every place has a bit of a different one, but we can do it here. And again, some countries have gone ahead and said, hey, you can now add these directly onto the digital label. You don't need to do it on the physical one. Some still require it on the physical one. So the best partner there to speak with is your importer. Just know you have full flexibility to comply with that here. Now, important to mention, we will not go in detail in this webinar since that is a whole other topic, but Italy and soon to be a couple of other European Union countries require, for example, the addition of recycling information to the digital labeling. So so you don't need 100 QR codes. We also will comply and do comply with those regulations right now. So in the case of Italy, you can just select what you use in your bottling, in your packaging, and then select the materials. If you have questions, we can discuss that also towards the end. And now just one more section with the QR code title. Basically, of course, the best is if you give it forward to your designer, and your designer, does it with your own colors and your own typography and kind of gives it the look and feel of your own label. But if for whatever reason we're rushing and we need to get it done and we can't pass through the designer, we also have here a system so that you can generate a QR code with the title already in up to 2 languages. If you're only doing nutritional information and ingredients, you can select the first one. If you're also doing recycling for like Italy, you also need to select the second one. And now to the ingredients list and the nutritional declaration. This is what has changed now with the new European Union legislation. As I mentioned before, the European Union has prepared a whole list of valid ingredients for wine. So if you are producing wine, you will most surely find all your ingredients over here. Of course, these need to be in the 24 languages of the European Union. And you see it here in English, but the platform automatically also translates this to the 24 languages. So everything you filled in so far and you're filling in now will be available in the 24 languages to the different consumers automatically. If for whatever reason you add a special ingredient that is not here, you can always select add it in the specific sections, or you can just add it at the end. In my case, and this is obviously a joke, but I always say, all my wines contain a lot of love, and I selected love as an allergen. Yeah, just as an example, that's how we would do it. Now, the preview ingredient list section, this is to make sure that we're ordering the ingredients in that order we mentioned before, from larger to smaller up to 2%, right? As we said, Most of the times for wines, that's just grapes and everything else. But, you know, in my case, my wine, for example, has way more love than grapes. And so I just put it first. And I just did that by dragging and dropping it to the correct space. And perhaps here I also just take a second to mention, like, as I said, the platform is made so that it is extremely easy to use. Everything I'm saying, right, if somebody took the time to read what is written on the platform, is already explained. So literally through these little information boxes or the different hovers that we have around, like here with our mascot Grapey, you know, everything comes explained. So there's really no real room for like mistakes. Now, the next section here is again some pictograms. These are 100% optional. The European Union has these 4 pictograms that depict basically what sort of main allergens are in the wine. You can select the right one. You can choose not to select anything, or if you also export to some other jurisdiction that has a special pictogram, you can upload your own. But you know, we also have the option here for those of you that want to use it. And then finally, we come to the nutritional declaration. Here we see this is the table. It's exactly the table we saw before in the presentation, obviously with a bit nicer design, but exact wording and everything else. Everything needs to be per 100 milliliters. Everything needs to be in grams. The order is given, the fields are given. There's really not much to do. And as we said, 3 ways of filling it out. If we have already the information, we can just go one after the other and making sure that we've got the information filled in. Or, if we've got, for example, some information but not all of it, we can use the calculator, input the alcohol volume, the grams of sugar per liter, complete the table, and it'll calculate the energy value. Now, given that we have that very generous error margin, in reality, I don't expect any wine to really be much below 75 calories or above like 125. So with most values, you're going to be on the safe side. And the main drivers in energy, regardless for wine, are always alcohol and sugars. So that's a pretty good way of calculating it. Now you see here the table is warning me, hey, the sugars cannot be higher than the carbohydrates. This makes sense because sugars are a part of carbohydrates, but the table itself is also smart, so it'll kind of warn us if there are things that really don't make sense, like like this in this case, right? If I have the same value or one higher, you see the warning goes away. Finally, if we don't have any sort of lab reports and we still obviously need to comply, we can use also the wine list. Yeah, the wine list actually is basically compiled by the US Ministry of Agriculture. And basically it's, they've got this whole section where they do studies on what's the average value of different products. And they also do that for wine, which is extremely helpful because it helps us, give you the option to say, hey, let's say I have a white wine. I can search here for my type of white wine, or if I don't have it, I can just go ahead with the general option. And again, based on alcoholic volume and residual sugar, I get a complete table with everything from the carbohydrates to the protein to the salt and everything filled in. And again, this is compliant because we're using industry standard values for the different categories, right? So it's a way of filling it in a bit of a quicker way. But again, you see, even though we filled it in a different way, it comes up to basically the exact same value in energy, right? With a very small difference depending on whether we use the calculator or just the wine list. And again, that's just because at the end of the day, there's only really 2 drivers when it comes to the energy. And before we finish, what is Grapey here trying to tell us? What Grapey's trying to tell us is that we need to remember to add this exact line to our physical labeling, right? Remember we said we need to add the energy to the physical label. Well, we can just copy paste it straight from here, and that is exactly the value and in the right format that we need to show it. With this, we started at the top, we're finishing at the bottom, we can save our progress, and once it's saved, we click done, and that's it. We've created our first label. We had already sent the QR code to our designer, it's already been printed, and the information is already here. Now we have other few options that we can do from here. So for example, let's say it's now next year, I produce the same wine again, it's got exactly the same details, I just need to adjust a couple things. I can always just duplicate the label and all that information. I'm sort of saving that double effort. Let's say that, for example, we sell through an online web shop also in the European Union. Well, they're going to require us to have this label in a digital format, so we can also copy the link to the label to kind of put into the web shop, and then consumers can see it there. Or, of course, if we want to preview how the consumers will see it, click here, the preview. And as I mentioned, everything in the platform comes explained, right? So you can really not put your cursor in many places without something trying to explain you what you can do with that. And it's just because we follow that philosophy of making it as simple as possible. Now, one more thing I will show, and we do offer this as an extra. It's not required. The European Union does not require that. But, you know, with the very limited ability we have to offer customization, because we are not allowed to offer marketing, we're not allowed to offer, you know, any sort of like highly attractive thing for the consumer. We do have in the company other products that do that, but for the sake of the regulation, this platform is not allowed to have that. But we are able to have some premium features where we can show the logo of the winery, and you can customize the look and feel to sort of go together with the look and feel of your actual labeling, so that when a customer opens it, they don't just see, you know, our colors with our forms and our fonts and everything else, but it can kind of fit into your general look and feel, particularly when you're trying to go for something a bit more premium, right? So here's how you can just control absolutely everything. We're also working to add different templates to choose from, so it can, again, match your style a bit more closely. But as I said, that is a premium feature, and it is not required by the European Union, since you know, the important thing is to comply with the ingredients list and the nutritional declaration, plus all the pictograms and all that required by the individual member states. Maybe just a bit more about exactly how our license works. So it's important to understand how long do these labels need to be active in the market. These labels need to exist for as long as the wine can be consumed. Now, this is a very long time in the case of wine. And so you need to take into account, even if, for example, you only export 5 or 10 references every year to the European Union, you know, next year you're going to need another 10 and another 10 and another 10 QR codes. So what we simply offer is an unlimited license. You can create as many as you need. All the past ones, you can keep them live, and it's $500 a year. And with that, you know, we always keep the platform up to date. Your old QR codes stay active and up to date with the new regulations. The new ones, you do not need to worry about it. You just fill in the information and that's it. And yeah, you can create as many references and keep them live as you need, in all the languages and everything else. Obviously, no restriction over there for as long as necessary.